back to another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. I am your host, Sarah. Please like, share, and subscribe to the stream and consider donating to our current projects in Yemen as the month of Ramadan comes up. We are trying to fundraise about $1,000 to feed the entire community that we work with for the month. Our guest today is the one, the only Chen Weihua, and I'm hoping that there will be no victims of Chen today. So, Chen, how are you doing today? And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, it's New Year's Day. I mean, we're supposed to be super nice.
Yes, it's supposed to be super nice. This will be super nice, I promise. So, it's the year of the wood dragon. I've been doing my research on Chinese zodiac symbols. I am an ox. What is your Chinese zodiac sign?
Rabbit.
Rabbit. I don't know what it means.
Actually, the year passed. I mean, last year was the year of the rabbit.
So was last year a good year for you?
Before the dragon.
Was last year a good year for you? Is it fortune for your zodiac symbol to be the year?
Well, I would say mixed. I mean, it's I try to be objective as a journalist. You know, it's good, bad. I mean, both sides.
So, Dugan actually, and a few other political analysts have kind of, we in the West and other places, with the dragon is the symbol for China, the bear is a symbol for Russia. So now this is the year of the dragon, 2024. A lot of political analysts are saying the rise of China, 2024 is China's year. How do you see it? What do you see in store for China for the year 2024?
Well, I would say, I mean, every year, I mean, for the last few decades, it's been the China year. I mean, well, I think, just to be objective, I mean, we are, I mean, actually just after, the whole world experienced a 3-year pandemic. I mean, we saw this crazy Cold War mentality brewing mainly in the United States. So the geopolitical confrontation, obviously we saw this conflict between Russia, Ukraine. Now, I mean, bombing, between Israel and Palestine. So obviously we are in a very chaotic world, not to mention, I mean, the challenges we are facing, like climate change, a lot of other issues, I mean, development for the global south. So I think it's a great challenge. But the year of the dragon is supposed to be, if people study the Chinese history or, understand any of the symbol, dragon is very divine, I mean, figure. It's a lot, very significant. I mean, everyone, it's symbolized as power, strength, good luck. I mean, so I hope this, a good year, not just for China, but for people all over the world. I mean, in terms of world peace, I mean, which, we are having wars here, there, and development, I think, which is critical after, even where I am, I mean, Brussels in Belgium, I mean, the Europeans, which are considered sort of a rich continent, is going into sort of a recession, in some countries, not in very good shape. So I think this is the priority. I mean, but in terms of China, I think, its challenges are opportunities always. I mean, the Chinese, the words, I mean, it's famously known, the crisis means Weiji, which consisted of danger and opportunities. When you are in danger, there was opportunities. So I think and the past few years has obviously proved that despite the very hostile U.S. government policy against China, I mean, since Donald Trump reversed the U.S. policy on China, and Biden continued or escalated, I would say, to some extent. But China not only survived, China prospered. I mean, I always tell European, I mean, China is 1.4 billion people. It's like a fifth of humanity. because most people have no idea how big China is, because each Chinese province could be bigger than a European country, so that's, the size. People don't have a sense. I mean, I always say, if, where I am in Belgium, it's population 11 million. But my city, Shanghai's population actually not 22 million. Some say 24, 25 million. So that's just the size of China. So I think in terms of that, China is so large. It's a continent. So it's as government always admit, it's uneven development in the west and the east coast, and in the north and the south even. So there was a very complementary, regional development to some extent, which means there was lots of surplus labor in some regions, which relatively low cost, and there was maybe more energy resources are located, and but there was where I'm from, East Coast, it's more densely populated. You cannot. There is not much land in Shanghai to develop. It's a tiny city comparatively to the provinces. So it's both. You see this Shenzhen, which basically grew out of nothing, arable land like 40 years ago. It's now one of the, not just China's biggest city, one of the four biggest cities in China, but it's also a high-tech hub for the whole world, for Asia. So many innovations come from there, and Huawei, a lot of Chinese tech companies based there. So I would say there was people here in Europe talking about, and the hot topic is the electric vehicle from China, because they're coming to Europe, in large scale. I went to auto show in Germany, and people talk about, they never thought about the Chinese car would come to Germany, because Germany is the place of cars. So how can Chinese car challenge German cars? But now time has come. Obviously, China has an edge in EVs. So that's just one example. We're talking about solar panels in Europe. Most are coming from China. So other technologies too. If you look at the China space station, it's, so it's just quite amazing development. So I think, but I don't want to sort of think everything is rosy. There was challenges in China. I mentioned China just lift 800 million people out of poverty in the last 4 decades. But in some area, people are still relatively poor compared with, say, my city, Shanghai. So I think we have a huge task. I always say, say you have one child, but I have, in China's case, it's more like I have 150 children at home. So I have to run the family maybe somewhat differently.
So recently, United States Army Special Forces, they made an announcement they're going to be training Taiwanese troops on Kinmen Island. The Pentagon said that U.S. support for Taiwan is aligned against the current threat posed by China. Can you tell us more about the strategic or cultural historical significance of this island, and what is China's reaction to the news that there will be more troops deploying there?
Well, unfortunately, I think this is the new provocation by Washington, I would say, despite, their recent rhetoric, some people think they have toned down, so they always say, hey, we are for peace, stability, status quo, but they're not, with such provocative action, because, people who understand China well, I myself, a Chinese, I think I don't speak for anyone, but there was the consensus in China is pretty much, anyone can correct me, Chinese don't want to fight any war, not with anyone, especially not one among the Chinese themselves, which means the mainlanders, again, the people in Taiwan, we are Chinese. So no one would deny that. I don't think even the DPP guys would deny that, because their father, grandfather, actually, many of them came from the mainland. So I think, the U.S. has been making all sort of provocations as a part of using Taiwan as a tool, as a leverage against the mainland, against China. And but I think it's futile, because the bottom line, I mean, the red line, I would say, in China is about sovereignty, territorial integrity. So I think the Chinese government pretty much expressed similar views that, will exercise the utmost patience to achieve peaceful reunification. But I think if Taiwan, the DPP guys, separatists there, or even, the Washington, some crazy folks in Washington, there to help Taiwan to go down the path of independence, I think there will be war, actually. But that's the worst case scenario. I don't think anyone is crazy at that point yet, because any war, I mean, between the mainland and Taiwan, I mean, which is likely to involve others, the U.S. or maybe others, is going to be a disaster, not for the mainland and Taiwan, but for anyone trying to be, for the world. Because, I mean, if you look at the Palestine, Israel, and look at the Russia, Ukraine, that's bad enough. But China, anything involve China, say, or the United States, you have to, I think, because even the Russian-Ukraine conflict, I think we are worried about further escalation, because there is no really diplomatic efforts going on, and people are drumming up for more escalation, more war, and there is a danger for, I always say, I mean, another world war starting in Europe. I mean, I'm not, I think, paranoid. I mean, this is real if we don't change the course. I mean, explore more diplomatic, But I would say, I mean, U.S. will continue to use all kinds of tools to irritate China. I mean, playing the Taiwan cards. But I think China has been, but it's very interesting. If people know, I have a neighbor back in the 70s, I mean, who was in the PLA army, at the time, actually, the mainland was bombing Taiwan, the Kingman, because it's just like 10 kilometers away. It's close by. It was a hostility years, Cold War. But, now, I mean, people take a ferry from Xiamen, the Chinese city, to Kingman. Many, traffic. I mean, it's a place of peace. There was Taiwanese coming to the mainland, and mainland go, there. I mean, it's just actually the mainland even proposed to build a bridge. I mean, because given China's infrastructure capacity, it's a piece of cake to build a bridge linking the mainland with Kingman. So, but the DPP authority refused, sadly. So this could be really a place for peace. I don't know why anyone want to, sort of fanning up this war kind of, actions anyway.
Well, I think you know why. I mean, the United States never met a civil war they didn't like. So I view Taiwan and China as a potential civil war. Ukraine, Russia is a civil war. Palestine, Israel, for all purposes, is a civil war. Syria was a civil war. So they really love civil wars. And it's funny that you said that about Kinmen Island, because I think the statement from the islanders was, we want to be a bridge to China, not an aggressor against China. And you're mentioning an actual bridge. Funnily enough, United States says that China is the current threat, but then the EU says something else. So China has already played an integral part in the Middle East. The Swiss foreign minister recently said in the last few days that he had hopes that China would take a seat at the table for peace talks regarding Ukraine. This is really ironic because the EU wants China to take an active role in peacekeeping, but the US considers China a threat to world peace. I always find that's very hilarious. But what role can China take in the actual peace talks of Ukraine? Do they have the ear of Russia in that way, or why is the EU kind of looking towards China to take a leading role in these peace talks?
Actually, I don't know they are looking. I mean, they actually, I think China actually, for people remember, made a proposal more than a year ago, and regarding the ceasefire, I mean, the end of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And because, people always view China and Russia have good relation. Yes, we do. But China and Ukraine have had good relation for a long time too. I mean, if you look at the, very good relation, actually, if you look at the response to the Chinese peace proposal, actually, President Zelensky was more positive than any EU leaders like Ursula von der Leyen or US White House people or Secretary Blinken. I think they wouldn't want China to score in any way. I mean, I think it's good they finally say some positive thing when China broke the peace, compromise between reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But on Russia and Ukraine, where after China put forward the peace proposal, they actually poured cold water, say, China is not a objective peace broker because it's pro-Russia. I mean, come on. I think, China, whether it's on the Russia-Ukraine conflict or the Israel-Palestine conflict, China wants a ceasefire now, as soon as possible. It's, I think it serves China's self-interest too, because China is the largest trading nation in the world. Any conflict, regional conflict, would be a disruption to regional global trade and would be a disruption to the Chinese economy, not to mention the civilians killed, I mean, in all these countries involved. And we're thinking the global south especially being impacted by the conflict too. I mean, indirectly, would say. So I think it's totally absurd lie. I mean, it's just like those people who try to accuse China for being a threat to the freedom of navigation here, there, especially the South China Sea. But who want to jeopardize? Why would China jeopardize? I mean, the South China Sea peace means more to China than any other country in this world. And why would China jeopardize that shipping lane? That's crazy. I mean, so I think Washington has been using all sort of, it has a monstrous capacity in disinformation, propaganda. It has all the powerful TV station, newspapers. So it is very good in manipulating information. I mean, we heard all kinds of things. I mean, that's also, you heard all this contradictory rhetoric regarding two conflicts in the Middle East and Russia and Ukraine. And even here in Europe, people, and because it's always used to be Chinese, they criticize them for double standards. Now, actually, Europeans realize actually we are exercising double standards on the two conflicts.
100%, 100%. We do have a clip from the recent wonderful interview with Putin and Tucker Carlson regarding China. I think that we have that queued up. Area.
We have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia, do you think, convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms.
Wondering what you first of all, Tucker's face as Putin's praising China is so great because Tucker is one of the biggest China hawks in the United States. Tucker hates China. So to hear Putin praise China, Tucker's face is like very upset. But what did you think of Putin's answer and sort of like this Red Scare sort of environment we're creating again?
Oh, first I would say, I would agree with you. Tucker is a China hawk. I disagree with him often. When he was at Fox News, but actually, occasionally he does some really good things. Generally, I would say. Even this interview, which is a big controversy here in Europe. Because you have the MEPs say we should have banned Tucker Carlson from Europe. We should have tell Elon Musk to not to air to, broadcast this interview on X platform, But anyway, going back to your question on President Putin, I think he is right. But I also want to say, I would say Russia at the moment, militarily, because the world nuclear powers, if you're talking about, are mainly Russia and the United States, which has, I don't know, I forgot the count. How many warheads they have, because it's changing all the time. But anyway, the two countries have like 90% of the warheads in the world. So basically, they can destroy the planet 100 times. So in that sense, these two countries are most dangerous. But that's why, China has been exercised. If you even ask the U.S. nuclear experts, I've actually talked to some of them when I was stationed in Washington. China has been exercised very much the restraint in developing nuclear weapons. Always have this policy like no first use or the minimum deterrence. That's why China has only like 300 some warheads. It's basically telling people that you should not use nuclear weapon against China because we have the capability to fight back. But when the U.S. hawks increasingly using sort of a rhetoric, portraying China as the enemy, adversary, what existential threat. That's crazy. I don't think is existential threat because just you go back 6 years, Obama has a totally different China policy, welcome Chinese enterprises. I covered the Select USA every year. Chinese companies, investors warmly welcome. Certainly, the Trump administration had a U-turn. Biden continued, double down on the Trump policy. So it's the U.S. which has been changing the status quo. I think treating China more like an enemy. So it's like Joseph Nye, of Harvard said, if you treat China as a friend, I'm not quoting literally, but basically he's saying if you treat China as a partner, you have at least have the possibility to have a partner. But if you treat China as an enemy, you're probably guaranteed to have an enemy. So I think, this self-fulfilled prophecy should not continue because if, two people treat each other as enemy, then I think that's quite dangerous. But if you explore the opportunity to seek a compromise, reconciliation, and that will be, better world, for our future generations.
How do we get the United States on board with multipolarity? Does it need to collapse first before we're ready to admit that China, Russia, and the United States can take leading roles in this world of multipolarity? Or, I'm just confused why the United States has created the boogeyman out of China. And then we look back historically, and China's not a very warmongering nation. They're actually quite a peaceful nation. So I think, do you think that opening up and like teaching people more about China and the West is helpful, or how do we get more people to understand that multipolarity is unavoidable and the rise of China is also unavoidable?
Yeah, that's difficult. I mean, I actually spent a total of 11 years in the US. I mean, work-wise, spent, 2009, 2018 in the US, based in New York and Washington. I would say the mood at the time was quite different. Obama encouraged so-called 100,000 strong initiative, encourage American students studying China. There were 300,000 Chinese students studying the U.S., and Obama also launched 1 million sort of study Chinese language program. But now, I mean, it's almost going back to the 1950s McCarthyism. The Red Scare, everything, relating to China is a threat. He is like, I think it's quite unfortunate. I think, I think probably some politician in Washington think the two parties are so, it's so partisan, they cannot cooperate. So maybe, but when I covered the U.S. Election, like 2012, 2016, I mean, China bashing is nothing new. I mean, everyone using it in every election. But the good thing is they don't really practice it, after being elected. They just want to sound tough, because, if you sound tough on a small country, you don't sound a tough guy, right? But you only take on China, I mean, the second largest economy, it make you sound tough. But that's just, I would say no wisdom. I mean, I would hope there was a U.S. leader show wisdom, I mean, courage, I mean, to, be realistic. But, you are right, you hit the point, because if you check any of the speeches by, the Porters or the Secretary of State or senior U.S. officials, none of them ever mentioned the world, the multipolar world, the multipolarity. I mean, even Europeans talk about it all the time. African talk about it. The Latin American talk about. Asians talk about. It's the only United States, I mean, leaders who never use such a word. It's like the vocabulary doesn't exist, and so which means they don't want that kind of a world. They want a world of U.S. hegemony. I mean, going on forever. But that's not. I mean, even you ask, I don't agree with Faria Zakaria. I mean, he at least you wrote the book about the rise of the rest. I mean, the rest. I mean, it's not just China, the emerging world. I mean, India, Brazil, South Africa. I mean, just to name it, Turkey. I mean, so the world, Indonesia. I mean, the world is so multipolar, and it will be so much. So if you look at the PwC, prediction of the largest economy in 2050, most of them are not the G7 states. Most of them are like China, India,
Right.
Turkey, Indonesia, those countries. So it's not so this 2050 is not that far away. For just we think, we know, I mean, what 26 years ago would look like. So I think it will probably, for the balance to tip a little bit more for Washington than to be more realistic. I mean, it's so the U.S. economy still the largest economy. I mean, but the weight by the China, India, and developing world is going to be much more. And it's like, the unfair international financial system. I mean, the IMF, China, the quota doesn't rise as much as it should deserve, right? I mean, for other countries too. So because this is mostly European, US controlled financial institutions.
So we're going to shift over to the Middle East. So
Mhm.
I have a quote from the Vice Foreign Minister Deng Li. He said, "The traditional friendship between China and Yemen is deep-rooted, with Yemen being one of the earliest Arab countries to establish diplomatic relations with China. China highly appreciates Yemen's long-standing and steadfast support on issues that involve China's core interest." A Yemeni official also said he expects China to play a bigger role in the Middle East. He described the relationship as deep-rooted. Can you tell us more about the historical ties between Yemen and China, and what kind of expectations could Yemen place on China in regards to their region of the Middle East? We kind of know what's going on in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb. China's ships are passing through no problem. But what does he mean by the deep-rooted historical relations between Yemen and China?
Well, I'm not a historian, but but as a average Chinese, I would say, I mean, my generation, when we were very young, I mean, grew up under Mao, and the African, the Arabs, our brothers. I mean, that's where we're taught growing up. I mean, we supported their struggle for independence. That's why, when you talk about Palestine. I mean, the name, because most Chinese familiar with Yasser Arafat. I mean, he visited China, I think, I don't know, more than a dozen times when I was little in the primary school. Probably he was there here, so we supported the Palestine people's struggle, and we supported African. That's why when China was rejoined the United Nations in 1971, it was largely, to some extent, thanks to the efforts by African nations, many of the newly independent African states. I mean, we supported, for example, the South African people. I mean, Nelson Mandela's, fight against the apartheid, and so why the U.S. still listed Nelson Mandela as terrorist. So I think that being long-standing, deep-rooted in average Chinese like me, I mean, my generation at least. So in that sense, we are close, I would say. But I think the world has changed. I mean, China and Israel has build up relations, after the end of the Cold War. So, I mean, my city, Shanghai, provided the safe haven for Jews fleeing Nazis, during World War II. I actually had showed many of my Jewish friends to that Shanghai, Jewish museum. I mean, in the years, when I was still in my home city. And so I think it's complicated, I would say, in the sense that, because the U.S. is still playing outside the role in the Middle East, because the traditional legacy, it's military influence, it's political influence, it's economic. I mean, but China, of course, is I would say catching up in terms of economic relationship, with Arab countries, in the Gulf nations, and China's Belt Road Initiative building infrastructure, China's energy need. So basically, we are for trade, economic cooperation. We are not looking to build military bases, staging a coup, or sort of invading, bombing any country. I mean, you mentioned, I mean, China's record is quite good among the major nations. I mean, we had a 3-week border conflict with Vietnam in 1979. That's it. We have not any armed conflict with any other country since then. So I think despite all the fear-mongering portray China as a threat, I mean, the facts quite suggest otherwise. I just briefly say, I think, for the current Red Sea crisis, I think, China, I mean, myself, I say, yeah, China is the largest trading nation. We want the Red Sea shipping lane to be safe. But at the same time, we think there should be ceasefire in Gaza, because that will contribute to the sort of, peace efforts in the Red Sea. But obviously the West, I mean, the United States, Europe, they refused. They said, hey, we should not link these two. I mean, come on. I mean, anyone with common sense knows they're related.
Well, the best is that they asked China, they said, China, can you help us getting our ships through the through the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea, and China's like, you could just not support a genocide in Palestine, and then your ships could just get through. Like, it's really crazy that they don't put those two together. Like for the United States, we should be able to traverse anywhere in the world that we want, regardless of what our actions are anywhere in the world. And China's like, it doesn't work like that. Like, I don't really, like, there's so much intellectual disconnect between like cause and effect in the United States. It's like completely gone, and we have no self-awareness at all.
Because they think everyone else is the idiot, is just stupid. Because even their rhetoric on Russia-Ukraine conflict, because China it's like I always say, I mean, because Russia and Ukraine both sound like our good friends. If you have two good friends fighting each other, your immediate response to tell them to stop, then assign blame later. You don't give a knife or a gun to one of your friends to shoot another friend. You don't do that. I mean, when you have two brothers fighting each other, you don't give one of your brothers a knife. I mean, so I think that's what China wants to do. But the Western rhetoric, I mean, from Washington, I believe originated, is that we should, defeat Russia to teach China a lesson. So now they say, oh, China, please come on to help us defeat Russia so we can teach China a lesson. That's crazy, because their rhetoric just defeated themselves. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's so I think China has been quite smart, because from the bottom of our heart, I mean, we don't want Russia and Ukraine to kill each other.
Well, yeah, yeah, and it's just it's funny to me that we've gone, even just in this interview, we've gone from the United States, China as the perceived threat to, why does China's ships get to go through the Red Sea and ours don't, as we commit a genocide in Gaza? But speaking of Gaza, yesterday Palestine came out again and thanked China for their support. What has China done recently in support of Palestine, either diplomatically or economically?
Well, I mean, just from personal perspective, I mean, China always have a good feeling about Palestinian, because, my generation, we consider them brothers. So I think we are, I mean, China is one of the, probably the first country, I think, a long time ago, decades ago, recognized Palestine as a country. We have diplomatic ties. I mean, long time ago, so I think we try to not just help them economically. I think China, I believe, is I guess that's my guess, mostly is doing. We did some. Everybody knows, I mentioned that we broke sort of a reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I think we tried to make efforts between Palestine and Palestinian Israelis, because I think China is in a good position, because we actually have quite a good relation with Israel too. We have good relation with Palestine, and we are not biased. I mean, it's not like the United States, which is biased. So you cannot be an honest broker. China is an honest broker, but the trouble is that the United States wouldn't allow China to play that kind of role, because it would make the U.S. look really bad, right? Because it's like, suddenly China kick out, it's like outshine the United States, the influence in the Middle East. So I think while the U.S. Continuously reject ceasefire, continuous supply weapons to Israel, while this bombing continues, we have 12,000 children being killed. I mean, the West, here in Europe, the harshest word they use is unacceptable. While, elsewhere, where the countries which they don't like, if they kill 3 people, they call it a genocide, a massacre, but killing 12,000 children is just lightly described as unacceptable. I think this is unacceptable words to me. I mean, so it's crazy. But I would say the challenge is huge. I mean, for China, China has been playing a role. China has called meetings of Arab country foreign ministers in Beijing, and China being traveling there, meeting their diplomats, leaders. But I think I don't want to sound too optimistic, because the European, the United States still had a lot of influence there. I mean, they are trying to drive a wedge between countries, not trying to, they're trying to sow discord, not trying to unify the region, the country. I mean, it's for example, they always try to pitch a country against Iran. I mean, if you want a reconciliation, you would want a reconciliation among the older countries in the region. Then we're going to have peace. And between Israel and Arab country and other countries in the regions, that's what we should do.
So again, in the Middle East, there's a really kind of terrifying scenario kind of unfolding around the Sinai Peninsula. Israel is actively threatening the territorial integrity of Egypt while planning to push 1.5 million, I think it is, the already displaced Palestinians in and around Rafah into Egypt. Can China play any sort of role in trying to mitigate this potential humanitarian disaster? Does China have any good relations with Egypt? Is there anything that China can do in this scenario?
Well, I don't think I can speak much on that, because I don't really know too much of the background. But I know pretty sure that China and Egypt have a very good relation too. I mean, we have good communications and good trade, good, I think ties have been quite good and good feeling. I personally, my years in, actually living in the U.S., I met Egyptians living in the United States, and they were very excited. I mean, when they say, "Oh, you're Chinese." I mean, actually, went to an Egyptian bar in New York, and the owner said, "You should." I went with my American friend from Columbia University. He took me there, and the owner, the Egyptian, he invited me on stage to do this belly dance, which I don't know very well. But he said, he gave a very convincing reason, because he said, "You are Chinese, you are our brother." So that's quite, something you cannot reject. You have to go, even you cannot dance.
All the Chinese people I meet, everybody is their brother. They love everybody. You recently asked a question at the European Commission. It's a kind of a long clip, but I do want to play the whole thing because the answer is incredible and ridiculous. So let's see this European Commission video.
Hi, Chen Weihua, thank you very much. I just want to follow up. I mean, could you say, in principle, what's the Commission or the EU stance, regarding, different views, whether you disagree or you think it's propaganda or disinformation? Does I thought the EU believe what, Evelyn Beatrice Hall saying, I disapprove what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. But to me that, living in Brussels, the media you get about information on Russian-Ukraine conflict is kind of a one-sided. Isn't that beneficial, healthy to hear the other side of the story, even you think it's not true or propaganda, whatever? Thank you.
Peter?
Well, thank you, Weihua. Well, it's not about the information, the one-sided information we would have in Brussels. I think the information is very clear, and the truth here is very universal, endorsed by the huge majority of the world, the countries in the world. Russia is conducting an illegal aggression against Ukrainian people and against the state of Ukraine. It's not one-sided, that's an objective fact. Putin launched his criminal 3-day special operation that lasts now for 2 years under completely false pretext. He is breaking and violating the UN Charter. It's not a matter of one-sided reporting of some media, as you put it. This is a matter of a fact. And we are not discussing here an issue of one interview or one news reporting. We are discussing the issue of information manipulation that is becoming chronic, especially on the side of Kremlin, but also some other actors in other parts of the world, be it state actors, as it is the case in some countries, some of them you might know very well, or non-state actors. And the problem is that the information manipulation, in this case, is directed against the European Union and is considered as a threat to our societies. It's not about trying to kill the discourse, exchange of views. What we are concerned about is the activity of those who are manipulating the information with the determination to undermine the public trust, to sow confusion, and against this we will be protecting ourselves. And of course we will not be doing it the way how they do it in Russia or in some other countries. Again, some of them you might know very well, through repression, through taking down online outlets, or forbidding journalists to work, or pushing them to exile, or trying to poison people, or through other forms of repression and censorship. We do this fight against information manipulation while preserving our freedoms and principles. And one of them is freedom of opinion, freedom of expression. So these are the main guiding principles for us. We welcome any debate, but even in the most heated debate, there are some facts which are universal and which are clear. And in case of Putin's illegal aggression against Ukraine, it's a clear fact that Putin attacked Ukraine for no reason. He is bombarding civilian infrastructure for no reason. And he is trying to kill as many Ukrainians as he can for no reason. There is only one reason. His twisted desire to reinstate the neo-imperialistic Russian Empire, where he controls everything in his neighborhood and imposes his will. But this is not something we are able to tolerate and willing to tolerate in Europe and in the world of 21st century.
Where do we even begin with this word salad? What was your reaction to that ridiculous answer? I love the jabs too. State actors that you might be familiar with. What was that?
You know, Sarah, I just to tell you, when I ask a question, I don't really expect honest answers. But I sort of, using this press conference platform to ask a question, as at least the people on the platform, the fellow journalists, the other EU citizens, could hear what my views are, whether you agree or not. But the fact is, we all know. I mean, I know what European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, for example, described. Russia's attack on, say, Ukraine civilian targets, but they refuse to say anything. That's why people use her tweets all the time when Israel bombed, Gaza into total, oblivion. I mean, I would say, killing 27,000 people now, more. I mean, it's rising every day. I mean, the truth is, EU has been, unfortunately, manipulating information right after the Russia-Ukraine conflict in February 2022 by banning all the broadcasts of Russian television in 27 member states. I travel a lot, in Europe. I mean, if you go stay in a hotel, you turn on the TV, the RT, for example, the sign is still there, but there is no signal. I mean, because it's banned. I asked a question on that day, actually. I said, are you guys advocating freedom of press? Why doing that? I think the spokesperson, the chief spokesman, Eric Mammer, who actually, I don't think he can defend, his argument. But at last he said, Chen, this is wartime. So it's like that's justified the banning of Russian TV because, it's wartime. I have to use all sort of legal, illegal means sort of to manipulate information. So that's why, the 450 million EU citizen Now they really get only one-sided information if they only watch the, the European television. And sadly, on the daily briefing in the Commission, many European reporters feel the pressure that they don't dare to ask a question that might be labeled that they are like Putin supporters, they are Russian propagandas. So, because in this age, I mean, sadly, some people don't like a debate while they talk about the freedom of expression. When you have a different view, they just label you Chinese propaganda, Russian propaganda. You are pro-Putin. I mean, why don't you just present facts? It's just like the most taboo word now is, how many years after this Nord Stream pipeline explosion, European Commission, they never want to talk about it, because they know who did it, and it's not Russia.
No, they've blocked every investigation. They've blocked investigations in Gaza, blocked Nord Stream investigation, blocked investigations in Ukraine. And then they say that, oh, China and Russia don't have free media. And it's just like, you guys don't even engage in any sort of discourse. It's just what I say goes, and that's the end all be all. Speaking of media manipulation, we recently had Carl Jha on, which was a fantastic show. If you guys haven't seen it, go back and watch it. It was so great. But we discussed atrocity propaganda, specifically surrounding Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. Real quick, we'll play that clip.
Every time Israel is doing something in Gaza or doing something Al-Aqsa Mosque, suddenly you will see all the Western major media news network will come out with a story. China has turned Xinjiang into the world's largest open-air prison. I mean, this is so obvious because everybody knows Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison. Then every time something happens in Gaza, they will come out with stories about Xinjiang. I mean, for people who know, this is so obvious. The thing about China is it's so remote. It's a different civilization. So even though people today in the United States have started to see through all the bullshit put out about mainstream media, especially on the domestic agendas, because people are more familiar with U.S. domestic context, and even about Latin America, because Latin America is closer to the United States, with people at closer cultural context. A lot of people speak Spanish, but when it comes to China, people in the United States just swallow all the State Department propaganda, hook, line, and sinker. Because, I mean, one is because they really don't have any context. All the information they receive from China is either mainstream media or all these news YouTubers who are probably sponsored by NED groups or Falun Gong, or they get their news from Falun Gong cults.
But I played it because last night, as I was on Twitter, out of nowhere, Uyghur genocide pops up as trending. And my stomach sank. And I said, oh God, Israel must be getting ready to do something absolutely horrendous. And then we hear about what was going on in Rafah. Do you also see this connection? And can you kind of give your opinion on how they utilize Uyghur atrocity propaganda every time something is happening in the Middle East, especially in Gaza, in order to kind of drive a wedge in the Muslim community, also drive a wedge between Palestine and China? So do you see these same sorts of patterns?
Well, I say a couple of things. I think, one thing, there was a big distraction, because if the U.S. government in particular, I'm talking U.S. and some of its puppet states as well, I would say. I mean, if Washington is not willing to call the Americans' treatment of Native Americans as genocide, not willing to call the Black slavery as genocide, not to call Iraq war as genocide, or Afghanistan war, or the current situation in Gaza as genocide. I don't know what they're talking about when they call every other country as genocide, when literally they cannot even give a name list of people being killed, actually, and I think, this is just a part of the, Washington rhetoric. If you look at, say, the Trump administration during the first year, actually, it's already into the COVID. I think there was a circulating GOP senator memo, which instructed the older senators, GOP senator, to say bad things about China, to make China look bad. And actually, someone at the Brookings talk, there was a CNN, I forgot her name, a national security reporter, say, we want to make China look bad. That's sort of the media agenda, unfortunately, for CNN, So all these U.S. government propaganda machines are being used to make China look bad. But it's the same China. They didn't talk about those that are bad. Like 10 years ago, suddenly we become bad. Suddenly Chen Weihua is a forced labor. So that's crazy, I would say. Talking about Xinjiang, I'm not an expert, but the Western rhetoric, they missed one major thing. None of them want to mention there was really a serious terrorist extremist threat in Xinjiang a decade ago, more than a decade ago. People being bombed, stabbed, police station being bombed, mother being killed by, the separatist. So it's like, I don't know how many extreme measures the U.S. government has taken after September 11. I was there even, when I was there in 2009. It's like 8 years later when they tried to have a Muslim culture center building in Lower Manhattan. They don't allow it, because they sort of, it's too close to September 11 side. You are not allowed to have a Muslim culture center there. So that's great. It's a culture center. It's for understanding exchange. It's not a sort of a military, basis there. So I think the U.S. Is very good at, smearing others. That's no strength. If you look at the U.S. presidential campaign or even the election by lawmakers, they are good at labeling, smearing their opponents, like Biden, or how he want to portray, dig dirt on Trump, and Trump do the same thing. They are experts at doing that. I think the whole, U.S. government establishment, they have this decades of, playbook of how to use their, propaganda machines, say, to make China look bad. Because it's easy. It's you invest very little, then you could hurt China. That's I think pretty much their strategy. That's it. I think China is not perfect. I cover, for example, just a week or 2 weeks ago in Geneva, the UN Human Rights Council meeting, and the Chinese chief acknowledge. It's a developing country. I said uneven development, a lot of challenges in human rights because of this uneven development. And so China never say we are the best. Here, there. It's unlike the US, we are the best, first, whatever. China never say that. China always say we are a developing country. We have a lot of room to improve. We are still, it's an evolution process. I myself included, I think that's a good attitude. It's not always doing things right. But if you look at China's trajectory in the last 40, 50 years, it's quite positive. It's a miracle. I just want to say maybe 30 seconds, say like my mother-in-law's generation, who was born in the 40s, and they actually supported the government so much more. Because they experienced the decades that which they live really in hardships. So life is so much better. I mean, they are happier. So I think, people have complained. That's nature. I mean, everyone complains. I mean, especially journalists. But, if you look at it objectively, that, you just have to be realistic. You have your concern. But you should also take into the concern of people, say, living the rural China, I mean, poor area in China, what their priority are. You cannot hijack their priority. So you have to keep a good balance. Again, it's 1.4 billion people. I mean, I don't know. People have a sense of what that means.
So just one last question. 2023 was a big year for BRICS, big year, a very big expansion. This year, we've invited already Venezuela, and Serbia is now expressing their interest in joining. Who else do you see joining this year, and who would be your favorite to join? Who are you looking forward to joining as the most?
No, I don't think I can answer that. I would say I would expect more Gulf countries. I mean, Gulf states. I mean, I would, expect, some African countries too. I mean, I honestly think that Africa is being overlooked. I mean, they should have a stronger voice in the world. I mean, it's a very promising land. That's why the West has treated Africa like a charity case for too long. And China sees its potential because from China's own development in the last 40, 50 years, I think China think Africa has that kind of a potential, to improve living standards for its people, which I think would be a great contribution to this world. But I would say, I mean, BRICS are very different from like a G7, which is more sort of a former colonial power, which try to pretend they represent international community. They don't. I mean, BRIC actually, if you look at China and India's population, that's already 2/5 of the world's, in the humanity. So I think that's actually so much more representative. It's like a G20 is so much more representative of the world today than G7. So I think we should, I mean, China, the BRICS is not a sort of a military alliance seeking confrontation, dividing the world into political blocks, try to pitch one against the other. It's open. It's like an APEC. It's open regionalism. It's, any benefits they reach, they want to, it's about the cooperation. That's the only way we are going to make the world better. We have to, live, coexist, I think, despite our differences. We may not like our neighbors, colleagues. It doesn't mean we have to kill them.
Well, that's a really great note to end this episode on. Thank you so much for your time, Chen. Where can people find your journalistic work?
Well, I mean, I'm still with China Daily. Obviously, I write the weekly column on Friday. So for the last 15 years, I mean, actually longer if you go to But anyway, I tweet a lot, as you mentioned. I ran into someone yesterday in Brussels. He said, "Wow, you are the Chen Weihua. I finally see the real person." So, but anyway, it's quite flattery for me. I mean, but anyway, I think I still try to ask the question at the European Commission press conferences, while some European counterparts feel politically incorrect to ask. It's finally someone Chinese propaganda. I was labeled by someone, want to ask the real question. Actually, there was one day someone in the audience, because I asked remotely, someone in the audience shouted, "Good question." So it's quite amazing.
Yeah, I think that was such a great question, because the answer was so telling to that question. It was just like, this man has no idea what he's even talking about, and just the hypocrisy of everything that came out. It was a great question to just kind of expose it. Well, thank you again, Chen. Happy New Year, and Happy New Year to all of you. Please share, and subscribe, and don't forget to subscribe to our Twitter. Now we have subscriptions. Thanks again, guys, and have a good weekend.
Good weekend. Thank you.